The stroke, it's been an area of basically medical despair, that nothing can be done. We just await the outcome, and that has absolutely turned around in the past 25 or 30 years. And on the one hand, preventing strokes, we'll talk about this a bit later, but on the other, when they come on, what you can do to minimise the damage. The important thing to realise is that the brain is supplied with oxygen through two arteries that come up through your neck, and that is the final pathway for oxygen into your brain, whereas the liver and the kidneys and the spleen and the gut, they've all got a backup blood supply. The brain has no backup blood supply once the blood is out into the brain. So if anything interrupts that blood supply, then that area of brain starts to die. Now, there are two sorts of stroke. There's the hemorrhagic stroke, which is where a blood vessel bursts, and it basically bursts through too much pressure. That's high blood pressure. And as you know, we've had a revolution in the management of high blood pressure because we've got such good drugs. We've got a PBS that makes them affordable, and they are pretty well free of side effects. And if you look at our fellows in the men's shed over 70, you'll find half to two-thirds of them are taking a blood pressure medication. And that lowers the pressure on the brain, so it makes it less likely that a blood vessel will burst. Because once a blood vessel bursts and fresh blood is blowing into the brain cavity, which is a closed space, the pressure goes up, and as the pressure goes up, the blood to the rest of the brain is compromised as well, and you're on a pathway to fairly severe disability. So the real thing with the hemorrhagic ones is prevent them. Then there's what's called the subarachnoid hemorrhage, whereby you have an aneurysm on one of the larger arteries around the brain. And these are usually asymptomatic until just before they burst, when you can have a thing called a sentinel bleed, which is a little leak which gives you a sudden severe headache from which you recover, or constant pain around the head where the blood vessel is pressing against nerves or something. And then when that one bursts, there's blood all around the outside of the brain. So you actually haven't interfered with the brain itself. You've filled the brain box with blood. And that leads to a sudden severe headache and often unconsciousness. But the good thing about that, it can be picked up with a CT scan or an MRI scan. And when they see the aneurysm, the surgeons can now go in and clip the aneurysm or bridge it so that you can then make a complete recovery. Now, prior to CT scanning, which is from about 35 years ago, all we could do with subarachnoid hemorrhage was sit and wait, and maybe do a few really difficult things like angiograms and try and operate. But now, with CT scanning, and there's another technique where they can pass a catheter up and put a little bit of glue in the spot and stem the bleeding. So the outlook in subarachnoid hemorrhage, provided it's diagnosed, is really good. Now, the downside there is that migraine also presents with a sudden, severe, debilitating headache. And so how do you tell the difference between the two? And the answer is that you need to do the CT scan. And you can follow it up with a lumbar puncture in some cases, but basically the CT scan, because the weakness is like a third of women get migraine, right? And so a third of people who've had subarachnoid hemorrhage will also have migraine. So people, it's just another migraine. Well, it isn't. Right, it's a subarachnoid hemorrhage, and it takes a pretty astute medical decision to pick the difference between the two and get on and treat it. So that's the hemorrhagic side. Then there's the vessel blockage side, whereby it's called ischemia, which is Greek for lack of blood. Now, as I said, the brain is supplied by these two arteries, they're end arteries, and if anything goes up those arteries like a blood clot and blocks it off, then there's an immediate lack of blood to a little area of the brain.